Good morning, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. Welcome back to my permaculture garden here in Portland, Oregon. We are in Zone 8B and it is an obscenely hot day here. I'm sitting in the rain garden here. It is a cooler, shadier part of my garden this time of day. Trying to stay out of the bright sun because it's miserable out. Speaking of miserable, I made a few videos the last couple of days talking about the really awful process of having images of my garden turned into a meme and having that meme go viral on multiple social media platforms. And what that felt like, what the lessons were that I could learn from it. And yesterday's video, I actually answered a number of criticisms that folks lobbed at me, or like really dogmatic assertions about what must be happening in my garden. And I spoke about those and made a lot of clarifications and really honest assessment of those criticisms and what it's like here in my garden. So if you have not watched those two videos, I encourage you to go check them out before you watch this one, or maybe after. It's okay if they're not linear, you can watch them out of order, that's all right. So I wanted to make a follow-up video to discuss the whole notion of why we, particularly in America, are obsessed with the idea of having our front yard not just be lawn, but be something that projects a certain image and projects status, and why that is a barrier to sustainability and why we need to rethink and reshape that notion to begin with. I am of German descent. We lived in Germany when I was a young child, and in much of Europe, it's far more common to have front yard veggie gardens, to have veggie gardens out in public, in view of your neighbors, in view of the community. When you have veggies growing in your own yard, whatever quantity you're able to grow at whatever ability you have, that increases your sustainability, it increases your resilience, it reduces your dependence on outside sources to get your food. It also provides a tremendous amount of enjoyment for those of us that are gardeners. There is much less stigma in other countries when it comes to growing food, particularly growing your food in sight of other people. Americans have created this very, to me it's very bizarre, this very bizarre norm, this very bizarre expectation that if you're going to grow food, you should hide it in your backyard. And I'd like to unpack that a little bit. So when the picture of my front yard garden went viral, a very common repeated statement was, why can't you just do that in your backyard? Cool if you want to go for sustainability, but it needs to be in the backyard. Keep the lawn in the front or a flower border in the front and grow the food out back. Nobody wants to see that from the street. And it really got me thinking, where is the stigma from? And what a weird notion that on my home, on my property, on the land that I own, that I pay property taxes on, that I have to care for, I should not be able to use it how I want in a way that feeds my body, feeds my family, feeds my soul, and encourages sustainability. What is it about the notion of having a highly manicured lawn, of having purely ornamentals in the front yard that we as Americans are so obsessed with? Especially when other countries think that is utter nonsense. Why would you waste the space that you have growing things that suck up water, money, petroleum, fertilizer, take time, and produce nothing in return? So one of the 12 permaculture principles says obtain a yield. If we are pouring all of our resources into a purely ornamental garden, not even just purely ornamental garden, but a garden crafted in a way that is communicating a message to folks who walk by our house, what is the yield? If it's sucking up all of these resources, what is the yield for us? And as I was seeing folks commenting, like, keep it in the backyard, your front yard should be for a lawn, your front yard should be for a formal border, I just kept thinking over and over, the yield is the perpetuation of classism. The yield is creating an image of affluence. The yield is advertising our wealth and wastefulness to the community. It's saying I have the money, the privilege, and the ability to throw away resources on something that does not actually produce a substantive yield for me. It's just about the image I want to convey, which is that I have extra. And if you look at the history of lawns and very sculpted ornamental gardens of the extremely wealthy, which is where the development of the lawn originated, it is all about conspicuous consumption. It's all about projecting wealth. It's all about saying, I have resources to throw away on a gardener who gets on his hands and knees and clips my lawn before the development of the lawnmower. It's all about saying, I am very wealthy so that I can afford this kind of access. And that has trickled down through the cultures. There's always this like middle class wanting to aspire to have the kind of opulence and an image of the upper classes, right? And so you always see kind of a reduced version of that, of what is happening in the most obscenely wealthy spheres. You often see that reproduced lower down because folks want to project affluence. And that's what we have when we have these front yard gardens. When you say my front yard needs to look a certain way, it needs to suck up resources and not produce food for me, because what matters is what other people think of my yard, and what matters is that I am communicating conspicuous consumption. That is perpetuating classism. To say that we must be required to take part of our family budget, part of our small plot of land, and dedicate it to the purpose of crafting an image that is unsustainable. That's baffling to me. And I grew up in a very upper middle class family with a front lawn and very formal front yard gardens. So I'm not saying that my upbringing and my social status is exempt from that in any way. But think about all of the folks who do not have the ability to waste those kinds of resources, who need to use their front yard to grow their food. A lot of people in my city use their front garden to grow food for many reasons. When we stigmatize growing food in the front yard, when we craft city ordinances that say your vegetation in your front yard can only be so many inches tall, or it can only include ornamentals. When my parents lived in Florida, they lived in a community with an HOA, and you could not grow any veggies within sight of the street. That was one of the things that they had in their covenants. And so my mother just grew fruit in the side of the street because it didn't say fruit. So she had orange trees and mangoes and papayas. And also she tucked in her veggies. She tucked in tomatoes behind the shrubs so that the HOA police couldn't see it from the street. When we have those kinds of ordinances that reduce folks' food security, that serve no purpose other than to create class divides, that say, I can afford to buy all my own food, and I'm going to stigmatize you and suppress your ability to grow all your own food if you need to, or a portion of your own food if you need to. We are harming our entire culture. We've got to remove the barriers that say front yard gardens should not be used to grow food. Maybe your front yard garden is the only sunny part of your yard. I'm very lucky in that my front yard is very sunny. My backyard is very sunny. In front of me, between the camera and the back of the house here, it's all facing straight north, and it's very shady, and I've put in a pergola, and we eat out here, and we use that space not for growing food. But what if the bulk of my backyard was shady? What if I was like many gardens like my neighbor? You can see right here, large conifers in their backyard with tons of shade. And the only place I had to grow was in the front yard. I should forego that because there's an image that I need to maintain? That makes no sense. If we are going to be a culture that pushes towards sustainability, if we look at the extravagantly high cost of food right now, if we look at the rising cost of living in America, we are simply shooting ourselves in the foot. We are harming our own security, our own community resilience, our own quality of life by having these really strange and rather antiquated notions of how we should be living. It's not even really antiquated. It's like this bizarre middle ground, right? Someone raised the very good point on one of the Facebook pages where my garden was memed that said the whole idea that you have to have ornamentals in your front yard and grass in your front yard is colonialist in nature. All of the Americans on this continent, before white settlers got here, did not have that idea of how American food production should go. It's just a very recent notion, and it's something that is not perpetuated in other parts of the world at all, other parts of the world that are more designed for resilience and sustainability. Other parts of the world that do not have the luxury of throwing away resources on a front yard lawn / highly ornamental garden / garden restricted from growing food. So when folks criticize my garden or saying like keep that in the backyard, oh, I can't see it. Why? Why is it shameful to say I grow a portion of my own food? Why have we made that a cultural norm? Why have we created such a weird way of relating to the food that we grow that it's considered like poor and it's considered déclassé to grow your own food? And also, like, why have we stigmatized the poor who need to grow their own food? All of these things are a barrier to sustainability, and we've got to really change that. I would love to find ways when folks have said in the many comments, like, I was so saddened to see how many folks said my HOA won't allow this. My city ordinances mean that I would be fined by my city. Not only that, but my city would come and cut it all down and then send me a bill if I tried to grow my garden this way. We've got to elect representatives who remove these barriers, who rescind these ordinances and craft ordinances like the ones here in Portland that encourage front yard gardens, that encourage you to maximize your use of space, particularly urban spaces where our ability to grow food is really limited. I have a very large garden for someone in Portland, Oregon. Most people have more like 0.08 acres instead of 0.25, or even less. And so we've got to encourage people, utilize your space how you best see fit. Maybe you don't want a front yard garden, that's okay. Maybe you need to have a front yard garden, that's also okay. So destigmatize growing front yard gardens. We need to elect representatives and encourage our community officials to change the ordinances to promote sustainability. We've got to retrain our brain. We've got to deprogram ourselves from the way we have been indoctrinated to think, particularly those of us that are middle-class Americans or upper middle-class Americans. We've got to deprogram ourselves. We've got to take time to deconstruct. Why is it that when I see somebody growing food in their front yard, in my neighborhood, there's people with their chicken coops in their front yard, like they look super cute. When we see that as we walk down the street, that our first impulse is like, ugh, I don't want to see that. Like, why? Why is that our first impulse? Why is it that we think we have a right to tell somebody that their yard and their garden must be performative in nature and must appeal to us, a total stranger? What makes me think I have a right to demand that somebody else's yard look how I want it to look? Or not even how I want it to look, how I've been conditioned to think it should look. Very much like how my body is not here to perform for other people and to look a way that other people expect. Why do we expect other people's gardens to perform for us and conform to what we want? We don't own those gardens. We don't own the people who live there. We don't know what's best for their lives. Got to take some time and unpack why it is we think their garden should look a certain way and why we think we have the right to expect somebody else would use their garden the way that we want. When we sit down and sit with those uncomfortable thoughts and uncomfortable feelings and take some time to really work through them, we can start to let go of the way we've been raised, the way we've been enculturated, and we can start to shift the culture towards something more sustainable. Again, I have a lot of privilege being in Portland, Oregon, where the kind of garden that I grow is very normalized and is very accepted. Some of the more affluent parts of the city have a lot of gardens like mine. They're much smaller because those lots tend to be much smaller and the houses tend to be much bigger, big old bungalows, big old craftsman homes. But those kinds of gardens are normalized even in homes that are worth $800,000 or $1 million. And I think that's wonderful that folks can work to destigmatize. We've all got to work to destigmatize. If you are tempted when you see a post of somebody's front yard garden to say, put it in your backyard, please sit and think about why that is. Think about how you might be harming yourself and your community by continuing to embrace that very antiquated notion that that's what a front yard is for the consumption of others, the visual consumption of others. We need to learn to live in a resilient society. We need to learn to craft a resilient society, not a consumptive society. So I hope that as we're looking at how we use our front yards, our expectations of how others use their front yards, that we will suss through the classism, the colonialism, and learn to shed those. And we will learn to embrace a different way of having our gardens, because we are living in late stage capitalism. We are living in a warming climate. We are living in conditions where the cost of living is going up and up and up, and our wages are not going up proportionally. In fact, the very few at the very top in America are getting very, very rich and not sharing those resources with their employees. The wage gap is getting much larger. And so those of us that live in a middle class lifestyle, we're starting to feel the pinch. We should align ourselves in solidarity with the folks who are perhaps in a less financially secure position and see what are they doing to craft resilience out of necessity, because it's very rapidly becoming necessity for us in the middle class as well. And we've got to have not only garden redesign to have sustainable communities, we've got to actually have community infrastructure and cultural expectation redesign if we want to have resilient futures. I hope that if you are growing a front yard garden and you feel stigmatized in any way, please share your garden pictures in the Park Rose Permaculture discussion group, because I guarantee you will get lots of support and encouragement from me and from other folks in that group. Folks who can counter the harmful messages you may hear from your neighbors or you may hear on social media. Let's all work to shift the narrative. Let's all work to change our expectations toward resilience and learn to find beauty in abundant, diverse gardens that are productive, that feed people. What is more beautiful than feeding yourself and your family a nourishing diet of lovely organic produce that comes out of your yard? That's far more beautiful than a resource-heavy lawn with some sculpted ornamentals. It's not just the physical garden itself, the landscaping that is beautiful. You're not obligated to perform beauty from your front yard to other people. But if you, like me, try and work on curb appeal as much as possible because you want your yard to be an ambassador for permaculture, let's think more broadly and more deeply about what beauty actually is. It's not just the visual appearance of the garden. It is also what comes out of the garden and what we internalize into ourselves from the garden, how it impacts our life. The beauty is multifaceted. It's not just what people see when they walk by. And so when you walk by a garden, I hope you'll pause for a moment instead of judging what it looks like, instead of being the people in the comments who are examples of how not to be, and you'll think like, how does this garden feed the body and the soul of the person who lives there? What are they getting out of it? They intentionally chose to design their garden this way. What does it mean for them? And that's wonderful that they can use their land in a way that takes care of them and their family and perhaps the community as well. So thank you for watching today. Please click like and subscribe. Please share my videos if you get a chance. That's really helpful for me. It can get this message out to more people. I will be back very soon from my permaculture garden. Hopefully the heat wave is passing. There's a lot that happens in late summer, and the topics of my videos are going to be transitioning a little bit from the height of summer here that we're in over the next few weeks as the garden starts to go through that last difficult spell here in Portland of very dry weather, and then thinking about our planning for fall and where we're going as the garden season starts to migrate this way a little bit. The garden is always in flux. There's always things happening, and there's always a seasonality to the garden. And so that means that my videos are constantly changing as the seasons change. The topics are constantly changing as we move with the flow of the garden. So I hope you'll continue to check back. Thanks again. I hope you all are staying well and safe. I'll be back soon. Bye.